Καλησπέρα σας κυρίες και κύριοι, καλώς ήρθατε και σήμερα στο κανάλι μας Ελεύθερη Πένα. Στο σημερινό σχολιασμό δεν θέλω να πω πολλά πράγματα, αλλά να αφιερώσω τον περισσότερο χρόνο του βίντεο παρακολουθώντας μαζί ένα απόσπασμα το οποίο νομίζω ότι παρουσιάζει πάρα πολύ μεγάλο ενδιαφέρον. Η πρώην Ιρλανδή Ευρωβουλευτής, η Clare Daly, επιστρέφει στο κτίριο του Ευρωπαϊκού Κοινοβουλίου ασκώντας μια καυστική κριτική στην καταστολή της διαφωνίας από την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση. Σε αυτή την εκρηκτική πραγματικά ομιλία, ένα απόσπασμα της οποίας θα δούμε σε λίγο, η Daly υπερασπίζεται τα προηγούμενα σχόλιά της, ότι δηλαδή μιλάμε για ένα πόλεμο δι' αντιπροσώπων του ΝΑΤΟ, αναφέρεται στον πόλεμο της Ουκρανίας, αλλά και το ότι οι κυρώσεις της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης τιμωρούν τους Ευρωπαίους πολίτες πολύ περισσότερο από τη Ρωσία. Κάνει λόγο για μια υποκρισία των Βρυξελών και όπως τονίζει, λίγοι τολμούν να πούν ότι η Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση αυτή τη στιγμή δεν υπερασπίζεται τη δημοκρατία, αλλά την εξουσία της. Σε μία από τις πιο συγκλονιστικές τοποθετήσεις κατά την άποψή μου που έχουν ακουστεί εντός της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, η Ιρλανδή Ευρωβουλευτής μιλάει, κυρίες και κύριοι, για έναν μηχανισμό, το διαβάζω όπως ακριβώς το λέει, της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, που παριστάνει τον υπερασπιστή των ελευθεριών, αλλά στην πραγματικότητα, όπως λέει, καταστέλει κάθε φωνή που διαφωνεί με το επίσημο αφήγημα. Όχι γιατί διαφωνεί με τα επιχειρήματα, αλλά γιατί φοβάται τις ιδέες. Πάμε να παρακολουθήσουμε μαζί ένα νομίζω πολύ ενδιαφέρον απόσπασμα.
In this building a couple of weeks ago, downstairs, the Irish Commissioner, the main man, Michael McGrath is his name, he's responsible for rule of law in the European Union, and he addressed the plenary session of the European Parliament. And he told MEPs on that day that democracy is the founding value of the European Union, together with respect for rule of law and fundamental rights. He told them that freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and association, and the right to participate in democratic life are enshrined in EU treaties, the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, EU legislation, and common constitutional traditions of member states. And he then went on and told them that citizens should be able to form their own opinions in a public space where there is access to reliable information from a plurality of sources with different views which can be expressed, where political discussions can be confronted, and where it's possible to disagree with one another. Powerful stuff indeed. Who in hell would disagree with that? But it's so brazenly out of touch with reality that I think many people would have found themselves scratching their head and going, where is this utopia that he's talking about? And none more so than myself and my colleague, former MEP Mick Wallace, who's also here today, who know the Commissioner well. And we knew him from our time in the Irish Parliament, and he never stood out then as a crusader for democracy. In fact, he was a member of successive governments which were entirely actually undemocratic in their nature. And his newfound interest in democracy actually was, you know, kind of particularly uncharacteristic until you looked at the title of the debate that he was introducing, and it was called "The Hungarian Government's Drift to Russian-Style Repression, Legislative Threats to Freedom of Expression and Democratic Participation." In other words, in layman's terms, this is the ongoing standoff between the centrist parties which have ruled Europe for decades now, who call themselves liberal, and the so-called illiberal regimes, on the other hand, led by Hungary's President Viktor Orban. And then McGrath's words make sense, because the real reason why the EU leadership stands so staunchly in defending free speech in Hungary is that it's speech that they agree with. And it's an entirely different matter if you have speech which they don't agree with. And that is the context of the European Union's disinformation policy. It's the fundamental point that people have to understand. It has nothing to do with democracy. It's a tactic that they use for people they don't like. And first and foremost, and most importantly, it is to clamp down on dissent, on those who would have the audacity to challenge those people who are in power. And so we have this fable of the EU's official platform for its disinformation obsession, that our democracies are under attack from malign foreign actors who want to spread disinformation, to undermine our societies and our governments, to influence our elections, to put us all against each other and break down our unity. And to stand up to this terrible threat, we have to defend our democracy by cracking down on disinformation and promoting unity in the European Union. It's absolute and utter nonsense from start to finish. Of course, foreign interference exists. Of course, states have the right to defend themselves from outside influence seeking to undermine them for the benefit of themselves. But Russian bots didn't sway European elections. Their outcomes were very firmly determined by domestic matters. Look, we all know that all states do propaganda. But what I found when I was a member of the Inge Committee, which was the Committee on Foreign Interference in all democratic processes in the European Union, including disinformation, which I was the coordinator on the left group for 3 very long years, I can tell you. But from my experience on that committee, the problem wasn't propaganda that actually came from external sources or foreign governments. The problem was narratives domestically that they didn't agree with. And I suppose I have to be honest now and confess at this stage that I would say that, wouldn't I? Because I'm actually a Russian propagandist, believe it or not, according to a Ukrainian hit list or whatever. And the 2 reasons why I'm a Russian propagandist is I said 2 things. One, that the war in Ukraine was a NATO proxy war. And the second, that the people of Europe were suffering more than the Russian economy from the sanctions that Europe had imposed on Russia. Now, I happen to stand over both of those things still, but rather than engage with me on the content of those issues, on the fact that Stoltenberg came in here and told us that NATO provoked the war, on the pauperising reality for European citizens crushed under the cost of living issue, rather than discussing those issues with me and taking responsibility as the European leaders who brought them in, it's much easier to smear me as a Russian agent or a Russian propagandist. And that is what the European Union's disinformation policy is designed to do, to silence anyone who questions their narrative, the official narrative. And to do that, they even have a toolkit to whip us into line, to suppress certain kinds of speech and to manage the kinds of information that are allowed to circulate in our society. So if you question their COVID policy, you're an anti-vaxxer. If you criticise Israel's genocide, you're anti-Semitic. And if you argue for peace in the war in Ukraine, well, then you're a Kremlin stooge or something like that. That's basically what's going on here. And how the European Union is going to deal with that disinformation comes under the defence of democracy package. They used to call it when I was here. I mean, did you ever? It's just pathetic. It's even been rebranded worse now. It's the European Democracy Shield. I mean, where do these people get off? And the committee is even called the European Democracy Shield Committee. And you literally could not make this stuff up. And the whole basis of it is that ideas are now dangerous and they pose a fundamental threat to our democracy, allegedly. The public sphere, the media, social media, where our society learns about itself and public opinion is shaped. This is now a battleground. Words and ideas are weapons. And the European liberals are here to save us from that, to defend us from these outrageous attacks. And let's be honest about it, despite the fact that this has accelerated massively since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there has always been a programme of repression by the European political establishment. And up until now, the toolkit has been kind of a soft form of repression, really. They had a number of tactics. You can read about them in the Inge report, which is the report of the old committee that I was on. But the approach at that time was kind of to do stuff like drown out dissenting narratives with propaganda in support of the official EU narrative. Now, when we do it, it's not propaganda, of course. It's called strategic communications because we're the good guys. But that was what they used to do there. Then they sought to co-opt social media platforms to de-rank narratives they don't like, and then they've pumped funding into these so-called fact-checking organisations to police online discourse. Now, we warned about this. They even toyed with the idea of making contradicting governments a crime. Did you ever? They had to back away from that one because that would be even a little bit too far to go, and you'd have to bring in legislation and a court case to deal with that. And this is where the European Union's 17th set of sanctions comes into play.
Μας μίλησε για μια ευρωπαϊκή ασπίδα της δημοκρατίας, η οποία δεν προστατεύει την πολυφωνία, αλλά εξοπλίζεται απέναντί της. Για μια στρατηγική επικοινωνία που δεν είναι τίποτα άλλο από μια συστημική προπαγάνδα. Περιμένουμε και σήμερα τα δικά σας μηνύματα, σχόλια, τοποθετήσεις και παρατηρήσεις, όπως πάντα εδώ στην Ελεύθερη Πένα. Αν σας άρεσε αυτό που είδατε και σήμερα, κάντε ένα like, φυσικά subscribe για να προσθεθείτε στην ομάδα μας, γιατί μας βοηθάτε πολύ, και καμπανάκι για να ενημερώνεστε πάντοτε και έγκαιρα για όλα τα καινούργια μας βίντεο σε καθημερινή βάση. Για μία ακόμη φορά σας ευχαριστώ πολύ.